The girl had no name. That's what they told Sheriff Caleb Thorne when he rode into the valley that morning, dust rising off his horse's hooves, the September sun already baking the earth before 8 o'clock. Someone had found her 3 days prior, wandering the creek bed south of town, barefoot and silent, her dress torn at the hem and caked with mud that had long since dried into grey streaks. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. When Caleb dismounted outside the church, Reverend Moss was waiting on the steps, hat in hand, face drawn tight with concern that looked more like exhaustion. "She won't speak," Moss said quietly, "won't eat unless we leave the plate and walk away, won't let anyone touch her." Caleb nodded slowly, eyes scanning the empty street. "Where is she now?" "Inside, back pew." The church was dim and cool, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears. Caleb's boots echoed on the wooden floor as he walked down the center aisle, past rows of empty benches. At the back, near the door to the vestry, sat a small figure, knees pulled up to her chest, bare feet filthy, dark hair hanging in tangles that obscured most of her face. She didn't look up when he approached. Caleb stopped a few feet away, crouched slow so he wouldn't tower over her. His knees cracked. He was 53 years old, and every morning reminded him. "Hey there," he said softly. "Nothing. My name's Caleb. I'm the sheriff here in Ember Bend." Her fingers tightened around her knees, but she didn't move otherwise. Caleb let the silence sit. He'd learned a long time ago that sometimes quiet spoke louder than questions. He studied what he could see of her, the bruises on her shins, old and yellowing, the way her shoulders curled inward like she was trying to make herself smaller, the torn fabric at her collar that looked like it had been grabbed and yanked. "You don't have to talk," Caleb said after a while, "but if you're hungry or if you need anything, you just let someone know, all right." Still nothing. He rose slowly, joints protesting, and turned to leave. That's when he saw it, just a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye. Her head had lifted, just barely, and for half a heartbeat he saw her face. Pale, hollow-cheeked, eyes too old for a child. And something else. Something that made him pause mid-step, a strange jolt of recognition crawling up his spine, like seeing a face in a crowd that you knew but couldn't place. He turned back, but her head was down again, hidden behind that curtain of dark hair. Caleb stood there a moment longer, frowning. Then he walked out. Back in his office, the heat was oppressive. Caleb shucked off his coat and poured himself a tin cup of water from the pitcher on his desk, drank it in 3 long swallows. His deputy, a rail-thin kid named Amos, was sorting through a stack of old wanted posters, the paper yellowed and brittle. "They say anything useful about the girl?" Amos asked without looking up. "Not a word," Caleb said. He dropped into his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "No one knows where she came from, no families come looking." "Could be Comanche took her family," Amos offered. "Seen that before." "Could be." But Caleb wasn't so sure. There was something about the way the girl had looked at him, or refused to look, that didn't fit the pattern of raid survivors. Those children were terrified, yes, but they clung to adults, desperate for safety. This girl pushed everyone away. Like she'd learned not to trust a damn soul. Amos tossed another poster onto the discard pile. "Got a backlog here from the war years. Half these men are probably dead by now." Caleb grunted, staring at the far wall where a map of the territory hung, pins marking recent incidents, cattle rustling, a stagecoach robbery, 2 drifters shot over card game, routine chaos for a county still crawling out from under the shadow of the war. It had been 11 years since Appomattox, but the scars ran deep. Land disputes, outlaws who'd never gone home, men who wore badges but remembered which side they'd fought for and settled scores accordingly. Ember Bend had stayed mostly quiet, mostly. Amos held up another poster. "Hey, this one's strange." Caleb glanced over. "Strange how?" "Woman don't see many of those." Amos squinted at the faded print. "Wanted for murder and theft. Sketch looks like it was done by someone half-blind." "Let me see." Amos handed it over. The paper was old, dated 1846, 30 years back. The ink had faded to a dull brown, and the sketch was crude, the kind of rough charcoal work that could have been anyone. A woman's face, angular, with dark eyes and a severe expression. Below, in smudged type. "Wanted, murder and theft." Reward $200. Last seen, San Saba County, Texas. Approach with caution. No name listed, just unknown female. Caleb stared at the poster, and something cold slithered through his gut. The face, rough as it was, had a certain shape to it, the eyes set wide. Sharp line of the jaw, the way the hair fell. He thought of the girl in the church. Amos, he said slowly, how old would someone be if this poster was made 30 years ago? Amos shrugged. If she was, say, 20 back then, 50 now, why? Caleb didn't answer. He kept staring at the sketch, his mind turning over possibilities that didn't make sense. It couldn't be. The math didn't work. The girl was 8, maybe 9 at most. But the face. He set the poster down on his desk, smoothed it flat with his palm. Then he stood, grabbed his hat, and walked out without a word. The church was empty when he returned. Reverend Moss was out making rounds, and the girl was still in the back pew, exactly where he'd left her. She hadn't moved. Caleb approached slower this time, boots barely making a sound. He stopped at the end of her pew and crouched again, this time holding the wanted poster in his hand, folded so she couldn't see it yet. "Can I sit?" he asked quietly. No response. He sat anyway, leaving space between them, and unfolded the poster, laying it on the bench where she could see it if she chose to look. "Found this today," he said. "Old wanted poster, 30 years old, probably nothing but," he trailed off, watching her from the corner of his eye. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, so slowly he almost missed it, her head turned. Just an inch, just enough. Her eyes flicked to the poster, and her entire body went rigid. Caleb's breath caught. The girl's hands were shaking now, clenched so tight around her knees that her knuckles were white. Her chest rose and fell in short, sharp bursts, like she couldn't get enough air. She didn't make a sound, but her lips parted, and he saw the way her jaw trembled, not with fear, but with something deeper. "Recognition." "Do you know this person?" Caleb asked softly. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Caleb's heart was pounding now, pieces clicking together in his mind that shouldn't fit, but somehow did. He thought of stories his grandmother used to tell, old superstitions about spirits and time, things that couldn't be explained by logic or law. He thought of the girl's eyes, too old for her face. And he thought of the bruises, the torn dress, the way she flinched from touch. "Who are you?" he whispered. The girl finally looked at him, fully, and in her eyes he saw something that made his blood run cold. Not innocence, not childhood, but the weight of decades, grief and fury and exhaustion so deep it had no bottom. Her lips moved, barely a whisper, the first words she'd spoken since anyone found her. "I don't remember." Caleb sat in his office long after the sun went down, the wanted poster spread flat on his desk under the glow of a kerosene lamp. He'd sent Amos home hours ago. The street outside was quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog or the creak of a shutter in the wind. He couldn't stop staring at the sketch. 30 years ago, someone had drawn this face. Someone had declared this woman a murderer. And now, somehow, impossibly, that same face belonged to a child who couldn't remember her own name. Caleb had seen strange things in his 53 years. He'd seen men walk away from bullet wounds that should have killed them. He'd seen droughts break on the very day a preacher said they would. He'd even once found a woman who claimed she'd been dead for 3 days before waking in her own coffin. But this was different. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The logical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through the war and 20 years of sheriffing, said it was coincidence, a resemblance, a trick of faded ink and a tired mind. But the other part, the part that had learned to trust his gut when nothing else made sense, knew better. He thought back to the girl's reaction, the way her entire body had locked up when she saw the poster, the recognition in her eyes. "I don't remember." Not "I don't know," not "that's not me." "I don't remember." Like something had been taken from her or hidden. Caleb stood, paced to the window, looked out at the dark street. Somewhere out there, someone knew the truth. Someone had answers. And if this girl, Whoever or whatever she was had been wandering alone for days, maybe weeks, then someone was looking for her. Or hunting her. The next morning, Caleb rode out to the creek bed where they'd found the girl. It was a 2-mile ride south, through scrub brush and rocky terrain that wasn't good for much except rattlesnakes and coyotes. The creek was nearly dry this time of year, just a thin trickle of water cutting through the clay. He dismounted and walked the banks slowly, eyes scanning the ground for tracks, signs of a camp, anything that might tell him where she'd come from. He found nothing but old boot prints, probably from the ranch hand who'd found her, and the scattered remains of a dead rabbit, picked clean by scavengers. Then, near a cluster of rocks, he saw something that made him stop. A piece of cloth, torn and wedged between 2 stones. Caleb crouched, pulled it free. It was faded blue, the kind of cheap cotton you'd find in a general store, but there was something embroidered along the edge, barely visible, just a few stitches in black thread. A name. Or part of one. Elaine. Caleb stared at it, his mind racing. Elaine, Adeline, Emmeline. He folded the cloth carefully and tucked it into his pocket, then kept searching. 20 yards upstream, he found the second piece. A burned scrap of paper, edges charred black, but the center still intact. He unfolded it gently, and his breath caught. It was a letter, or part of one. The handwriting was elegant, looping, written in ink that had bled slightly from water damage. Most of it was illegible, but he could make out a few lines. Must not speak of what you saw. If they find you, they will. The rest was burned away. Caleb's hands were shaking now. He looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed he was out here, how quiet the world had gone. No birds, no wind, just the faint trickle of the creek and the pounding of his own heartbeat. Someone had burned this letter recently, and someone had torn that cloth from the girl's dress, which meant whoever had done it might still be close. By the time Caleb got back to town, it was late afternoon. He went straight to the church, found the girl still in the back pew, same position, same haunted stillness. Reverend Moss was sitting with her, reading from a Bible in a low, soothing voice, but the girl's eyes were somewhere else entirely. Caleb waited until Moss finished a passage, then approached. "Reverend, I need a moment." Moss nodded, stood, and stepped outside. Caleb sat down beside the girl again, this time close enough that she could see what he held in his hand. He unfolded the piece of cloth, laid it on the bench between them. "Found this by the creek," he said quietly. "Looks like it was torn from a dress, maybe yours." The girl's eyes flicked to it, her breathing quickened. "There's a name stitched here," Caleb continued. "Part of one, anyway. Elaine, does that mean anything to you?" For a long time, she didn't move. Then, slowly, so slowly it hurt to watch, she reached out and touched the fabric with one fingertip, tracing the letters like they were made of glass. "Madeline," she whispered. Caleb's chest tightened. "Is that your name?" She nodded, just barely. "Madeline," he repeated, testing the weight of it. "All right, that's a start." He paused, then pulled out the burned letter, unfolded it carefully. "I found this too. Do you know what it says?" Madeline stared at the paper, her face going pale. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Madeline," Caleb said gently, "if someone's after you, I need to know. I can help, but you have to tell me what happened." Her eyes lifted to his, and he saw tears brimming there, not from fear, but from something deeper. Frustration, desperation. "I don't remember," she said again, her voice breaking. "I don't remember anything before the water, before the dark. I was somewhere else, and then I was here, and I'm wrong. I know I'm wrong." Caleb frowned. "What do you mean, wrong?" She looked down at her own hands, small and childlike, and her face twisted with something like disgust. "These aren't mine," she whispered. And in that moment, Caleb understood. She wasn't a child who'd forgotten her past. She was someone, trapped in a child's body, with 30 years of memory locked away behind a door she couldn't open. That night, Caleb sat alone in his office again, the wanted poster and the burned letters side by side on his desk. He poured himself a whiskey, drank it in one swallow, then poured another. His mind kept circling back to one question. What had she seen? The letter said it clearly, must not speak of what you saw. 30 years ago, Madeline, whoever she'd been, had witnessed something bad enough that someone wanted her dead, and now somehow she was back, younger, hidden. But not forgotten, which meant whoever had tried to kill her before might still be looking. And they might have just found her. The rider came at dawn. Caleb was at his desk, halfway through his second cup of coffee, when he heard the hoofbeats, fast and hard, the kind of pace that meant urgency or trouble. He stood, walked to the window, and watched as a man in a long black coat dismounted outside the saloon across the street. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low over his face. He moved with the kind of deliberate calm that came from experience, someone who'd been in tight spots before and wasn't rattled by them. Caleb didn't recognize him. That alone was enough to put him on edge. The man tied his horse, adjusted his coat. Caleb caught the glint of a gun belt underneath, and then walked straight toward the sheriff's office. Caleb stepped back from the window, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. The door opened without a knock. The man stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and pulled off his hat. He was older than Caleb had first thought, late 50s, maybe 60, with silver streaking through his dark hair and deep lines carved into his face. His eyes were pale blue, cold and calculating, and when he smiled, it didn't reach them. "Sheriff Thorne," the man said. His voice was smooth, educated, with a faint trace of an accent Caleb couldn't quite place. "Forgive the intrusion. My name is Garrett Lyle. I'm a private investigator out of Austin." Caleb didn't offer his hand. "What brings you to Ember Bend, Mr. Lyle?" Lyle's smile widened slightly. "I'm looking for someone, a girl, young, dark hair, approximately 8 years old. I have reason to believe she's in your custody." Caleb's gut tightened. "What's your interest in her?" "Professional," Lyle said smoothly. "I've been hired by a family in San Saba County. The girl is their ward, ran away 3 weeks ago. They're very concerned for her safety." "Is that so?" "It is." Lyle stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Caleb's. "I'd like to see her, confirm her identity, then I'll take her home where she belongs." Caleb held his gaze. "If she ran away, maybe she had a reason." Lyle's smile faded. "Sheriff, I don't think you understand the delicacy of this situation. The family I represent is influential. They have resources, connections. If you interfere, it won't end well for you." "That a threat?" "It's a courtesy." Caleb's hand tightened on his revolver. "The girl's under my protection until I know she's safe. You want to see her, you're going to need more than a story about concerned family." Lyle's expression went cold. "I see." He put his hat back on, adjusted it slowly. "I'll be staying at the boarding house. I suggest you reconsider your position, Sheriff, quickly." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Caleb stood there for a long moment, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then he grabbed his coat and headed for the church. Madeline was awake when he arrived, sitting upright in the pew, her eyes wide and alert. She looked at him as he approached, and he saw fear there, real primal fear. "He's here," she whispered. Caleb crouched in front of her. "Who?" "I don't know his name, but I know his face." Her hands were shaking. "He's the one who found me before at the creek. He was asking questions, looking for something." "Did he hurt you?" "No, but he would have." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "He's looking for proof." "Proof of what?" "That I'm still alive." Caleb's blood ran cold. "Madeline, listen to me. I need you to tell me everything you remember. Doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense. I need to know what I'm dealing with." She closed her eyes, her face twisting with the effort of remembering. "There was a house, a big house, stone and wood. I worked there. I was older, a woman. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." "What did you see?" "A man dead in the cellar, and the man who owned the house, he saw me see it." Her eyes opened, glassy with tears. "He said I'd hang for it, that he'd make sure of it. He had the law in his pocket, so I ran. And someone made a wanted poster." She nodded. "But I never killed anyone, I swear it." Caleb believed her. He didn't know why, but he did. "How did you end up like this?" he asked gently. "A child." "I don't know. I remember running, hiding, and then Water, cold water pulling me down. I thought I was dying. And then I woke up here like this, and I didn't know where I was or how much time had passed. I just knew I had to hide. Caleb exhaled slowly. The man who came looking for you, Garrett Lyle, you think he's connected to the one who framed you? I think he works for him, or is him. She looked up at Caleb, desperation in her eyes. Please don't let him take me. I won't, Caleb said, and he meant it. By noon, word had spread through town. A stranger asking questions, a girl with no name. Folks started gathering in the street, whispering, casting glances toward the boarding house where Lyle was staying. Caleb stood on the steps of his office, watching the crowd grow. Amos appeared at his side, nervous. People are scared, boss. They're saying we should just hand her over, avoid trouble. People always say that, Caleb muttered, doesn't make it right. But if he's got connections, then we deal with it. Amos swallowed hard. You really think she's telling the truth, that someone framed her 30 years ago and now she's, what cursed, reborn? I think, Caleb said slowly, that someone powerful did something terrible a long time ago and thought they got away with it. And now they're trying to finish the job. Across the street, the door to the boarding house opened. Garrett Lyle stepped out, followed by 3 other men, all armed, all watching the crowd with the cold eyes of hired guns. Lyle looked directly at Caleb and smiled. Then he started walking toward the church. Caleb moved fast. He crossed the street in long strides, positioning himself between Lyle and the church steps. The crowd parted, uneasy, watching. Amos followed close behind, hand on his sidearm. Lyle stopped 10 feet away, his 3 men fanning out behind him. Sheriff, Lyle said pleasantly, I tried to be reasonable. And I told you no. Lyle sighed like he was dealing with a stubborn child. The girl is property of the Ashford estate. I have documents proving it, legal documents, signed by a judge in San Saba County. Then the judge is corrupt, Caleb said flatly. Lyle's smile didn't waver. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. One of the hired guns shifted his weight, fingers twitching near his holster. Caleb didn't take his eyes off Lyle. You're not taking her, Caleb said. Then you're obstructing justice. Justice, Caleb spat the word. You wouldn't know justice if it shot you in the face. The crowd murmured. Lyle's smile finally faded. Last chance, Sheriff. No. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with tension, the kind that snapped like dry wood before a fire. Then from behind Caleb, a voice, small and clear. Stop. Everyone turned. Madeline stood in the doorway of the church, barefoot, her dress still torn and dirty, but her eyes sharp and steady. She looked at Lyle, and something passed between them, recognition, fury, old wounds reopened. You were there, she said quietly, 30 years ago. You helped him bury the body. Lyle's face went still. Madeline, Caleb started, but she stepped forward, ignoring him. His name was Thomas Whitfield, she continued, her voice growing stronger. He worked for the Ashford family. He found out they were smuggling guns to Comancheros, using their ranch as a waypoint. So Ashford killed him, shot him in the cellar and buried him under the floor. I was in the kitchen. I heard the shot. I went down and saw it. The crowd was dead silent now. Ashford told me I'd hang for it if I talked, Madeline said. Said he'd make a wanted poster, say I did it. And then he sent his men after me. I ran for 3 weeks before they caught me at the river. Her hands clenched into fists, and one of those men was you. Lyle didn't deny it. He just stared at her, his face unreadable. You held me under the water, Madeline whispered. You drowned me. So here's the question. If you were standing in that street, watching this unfold, would you have stepped in? Would you have believed her? Take a breath, think about that. And if you're still with me, tap subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. Caleb's mind was reeling, but his body moved on instinct. He stepped in front of Madeline, blocking her from Lyle's line of sight. Get back inside, he told her quietly. No, Madeline, I'm not running again. Lyle finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. You should have stayed dead. But I didn't, Madeline said, and now everyone's going to know what you did. Lyle's hand dropped to his gun. Caleb's revolver was out in a heartbeat, leveled at Lyle's chest. Don't. The three hired guns drew their weapons. Amos pulled his. The crowd scattered, people diving for cover behind wagons and barrels. For a frozen moment, the world balanced on the edge of a knife. Then, from the far end of the street, a voice rang out. Garrett! Everyone turned. A man on horseback rode into view, older, white-haired, dressed in expensive clothes that didn't belong in a place like Ember Bend. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, and walked toward the standoff with the calm confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Caleb recognized him from old newspapers. Senator Clayton Ashford. Senator Ashford stopped beside Lyle, looked at Madeline and then at Caleb. His expression was unreadable, neither angry nor surprised, just tired. Garrett, he said quietly, put the gun away. Lyle hesitated. Senator, she knows. I know what she knows. Ashford's voice was sharp now. I said put it away. Slowly, reluctantly, Lyle holstered his weapon. The hired guns followed suit. Amos didn't lower his gun. Neither did Caleb. Ashford looked at Madeline for a long moment, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe even regret. Madeline Hayes, he said softly, I thought you were dead. You made sure of it, Madeline said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Ashford nodded slowly. I did, or I tried to. He glanced at Lyle. Garrett here was supposed to make it clean, permanent, but it seems he failed. Senator, Lyle started, but Ashford raised a hand. 30 years, Ashford continued, looking back at Madeline. 30 years, and I've carried that night with me every single day. I told myself it was necessary, that you would have ruined everything. That one life didn't matter weighed against what I was building. You killed an innocent man, Madeline said, and you framed me for it. I did, Ashford's voice was hollow, and I've been a senator, a landowner, a man of influence, and none of it has given me a single night of peace. The crowd slowly began to emerge from cover. They stood at a distance, watching, listening. Caleb kept his gun raised. If you're expecting sympathy, you're not going to find it here. Ashford shook his head. I'm not asking for sympathy, I'm asking for an end. He reached into his coat. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger, but all Ashford pulled out was a folded piece of paper. He held it out toward Caleb. A full confession, Ashford said. Signed, dated, everything she said is true. Thomas Whitfield's body is still buried under the old ranch house cellar floor. I killed him, I ordered her death, and I've lied about it for 3 decades. Caleb took the paper slowly, unfolded it, scanned the handwriting. It was all there, names, dates, details that could only have come from someone who'd been there. Why? Caleb asked. Ashford looked at Madeline again. Because I'm dying, cancer. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4, and I don't want to die with this on my soul. His voice cracked. I don't want to die a coward. Madeline stared at him, her face unreadable. You think this makes it right, she whispered. No, Ashford said, nothing makes it right, but it's the truth, and it's all I have left to give. The town of Ember Bend had never seen a crowd like this. By the time the Texas Rangers arrived 3 days later, word had spread across 2 counties. Ashford's confession was published in every newspaper from Austin to San Antonio. The body of Thomas Whitfield was exhumed from the cellar of the old Ashford Ranch, exactly where Madeline said it would be. Garrett Lyle and his men were arrested. Ashford didn't resist when they took him into custody. He died 6 weeks later in a jail cell in San Antonio, never having stood trial. The wanted poster, the one with Madeline's face on it, was officially rescinded. Her name was cleared. But the mystery of how she'd returned, young and unchanged, remained. Caleb sat with her on the church steps one evening, a month after everything had settled. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. What will you do now? He asked. Madeline was quiet for a long time. I don't know, I'm not who I was, but I'm not who I am either. You're alive, Caleb said. That's enough. Is it? He didn't have an answer for that. She looked down at her small hands, turned them over slowly. I used to have calluses. From years of washing, sewing, working, now they're smooth, like I never lived at all. You lived, Caleb said firmly, and you survived twice. That's more than most people can say. She smiled, just a little, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Will you stay? He asked. For a while, she looked at him. Is that all right? More than all right. Over the following months, Madeline stayed in Ember Bend. Reverend Moss took her in, gave her a room in the parsonage, taught her to read and write again. Her hands remembered the motions, even if her mind didn't always recall the words. She helped in the church, mending clothes, cleaning, tending the small garden out back. Slowly, carefully, she began to build a life. People in town whispered, of course. They always would. But they also learned to nod when they passed her on the street, to leave small gifts on the church steps, a loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, a pair of shoes that fit her small feet. Acts of quiet kindness, the kind that built trust one gesture at a time. Caleb visited often. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in silence, watching the world go by. He never pressed her about what had happened, how she'd come back, why she was young again. He figured some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. They were just meant to be lived through. Years later, after Caleb had retired, after Amos had taken over as sheriff, after Madeline had grown again into a young woman with her own life and her own choices, Caleb would sit on his porch in the evenings and think about that strange, impossible autumn. About a girl with no name who'd carried the weight of 30 years in her eyes. About a senator who'd confessed his sins too late to matter, but just in time to free her. About the way justice sometimes came not from the law, but from people deciding they wouldn't look away. He kept the wanted poster folded carefully in a drawer, not as a reminder of guilt, but of survival, of the second chances the world sometimes gave, even when it made no sense. On quiet nights, when the wind blew through the valley and the stars hung low and bright, Caleb would pour himself a whiskey and raise the glass toward the horizon. To the ones who came back, he'd murmur. And somewhere, out in the wide, endless West, Madeline was living, finally, truly living, and that was enough.